found out wrestling wasn't real when I was around sort of 13, and in secondary school, me and my mates were in drama class where we were given a sort of vague topic to create a play on, which was something along the lines of heroes and heroines, and instead of, crafting a wonderful, emotional, short play, we instead spent the entire time doing wrestling moves on each other because we were in love with the Attitude Era. Oh, what about the Attitude Era? So there was a rock bottom here, there was a sharpshooter there, and then for some reason the conclusion to our play was me being put in the walls of Jericho. And as I was there concluding the play, I suddenly realised, there's a way you can do this move where it doesn't even hurt me whatsoever. And I proceeded to have the sort of usual suspects coffee drop moment of, hang on, if there's a way to do it like that, maybe that explains why these men are able to do what they can to each other every single week on a Monday night. It was either that or the time I watched Exposed Pro Wrestling Secrets Revealed, or whatever it's called, that documentary with the voice of Salem the Cat from Sabrina the Teenage Witch telling me about stunt grannies. One of the two.
When did I find out wrestling was fake? Not fake, predetermined, always predetermined. Well, it was my father, bless his heart, bless his soul, and he kind of had a good reason to do it. When you're a kid and you're running around and you kind of get a little bit silly. I thought it'd be really fun to perform DDTs on people. A mate of mine gave me a choke slam. I think we did a tombstone pile driver once. It was kind of safe because my head was, I was basically up by his belly button. So if you had looked at it, you would have gone on the internet straight away. Had the internet existed then, it would have existed, but not like in the community we have now. And you would have gone, that was the wildest tombstone pile driver I'd ever see. And that would have been fair. But yeah, after all of this, and I think my father being very worried that I was going to kill myself doing a bit of backyard wrestling, he sat me down and he told me, and he played it to me straight. He said, look, what you're seeing is a bunch of baloney and none of it is real. And I was like, Dad, you don't understand. They're sports entertainers, but the hazards are real. He hadn't seen the commercial at the time. I tried to explain to him, like Freddie Blassie, never done a moonsault, but he wasn't interested. So yeah, he just told me. I think around the same time, and I won't say that, I don't want to spoil it in case there's kids watching, but the other thing you find out when you're young happens around the end of the year. Yeah, I think he spoiled that for me as well. So my dad was just on a tirade then, and I don't think I did know. I can't remember now, right? But I remember being very upset, or at least very, very perturbed, and dealing with it. It was a bit like an emotional attack on my loins and my brain and my heart, and I had to sit down and go, okay, what do I do with this? But luckily I was already in love with it, and I fell in love with it anyway. I stopped watching it for a little bit around university because I didn't have access, but then as soon as I was and I had access again, that was it. It was like bam, put it right in there, and I've been watching ever since, and I'll probably be on my deathbed one day debating the ups and downs of Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13. And that is why wrestling is never fake, because it's still real to me, damn it, tear in my eye. Now we're just doing wrestling catchphrases. But yes, it was Mr. Miller, Mr. Graham Miller, if you want to go throw some shade at him. Son of a gun.
So my professional wrestling fandom is entirely predicated on the childhood belief that Rowdy Roddy Piper was a Scottish male human being, Scottish being the key part of that, because the first show I ever watched, and I've told this on the channel before, was the 1992 Royal Rumble. It has Roddy Piper versus the Mountie in an Intercontinental title match, and it's not a special match, but as a child, when you see this superhero guy on TV and he's Scottish just like you kind of get behind that. You support it, and he becomes your first favourite wrestler and a gateway into the sport. That match, that 6-minute nonsense match, was more of a gateway to me than the great Royal Rumble on that card, which is probably, I don't know, like a top 3 Royal Rumble ever. I'm getting totally off the point here. But basically, the moment I knew wrestling was fake, or the moment I found out, I couldn't tell you what year it was. Everything's fuzzy, man. I can barely remember what I had for lunch. But the moment I knew the whole thing was a facade was when some bellend at school told me that Roddy Piper isn't even Scottish. And from there, the whole universe unraveled. It was like, you mean to tell me that Mabel isn't a real king? Diesel isn't a substance turned into a man that you put into fuel a truck? What kind of nonsense are we talking here? But obviously, you can only swim against the denial for so long. And that was that. Roddy Piper, Roderick Toombs, Canadian gentleman with Scottish heritage. Not a real Scotsman. Still love him though, but man, those wounds took a long time to heal.
Hey, my name's Nathan. I'm a new presenter here on WhatCulture Wrestling. I'm looking forward to working with all the WhatCulture guys and, of course, getting some good videos out to all of you talking about the thing we all love, wrestling. And on that subject, when was the moment that I realised wrestling was scripted? Got to go back to 1999 for this one. The finger poke of doom. I couldn't understand as a 9-year-old how Kevin Nash, so big, got poked in the chest, lost the title 1, 2, 3 against Hogan. I just couldn't figure it out. There was probably more moments as well, but that's the one moment that stuck in my mind when I thought, something a bit dodgy here.
I found out about this the same way I found out about all of these kind of reality-shattering childhood moments, the same way I found out about Father Christmas, the same way I found out what an armbar feels like when you really, really crank it in, the same way I found out that my ears stuck out more than the average person's from my older brother. I had borrowed his tape for probably about the 1000th time. It was like this old Silvervision VHS cassette. It was The Undertaker, just called The Phenom, and it kind of covered his career from like 96 through to 98, through all the Mankind and the Shawn Michaels and the Kane stuff. I loved it. I watched it so many times. Anyway, I'd borrowed it, and he found out that I'd borrowed it without asking his permission again. So he grabbed the tape, he ejected it, pulled all of the tape out of the cassette, and said, "You know it's all fake, don't you?" Well, I like to think I'd already kind of figured out the fake thing, because I was just literally watching a video where a man can control lightning and set things on fire with his mind, but I still really, really, really loved that video. So I told my dad that he'd stolen some money and bought a bunch of porn magazines with it, which was true, and I told that girl he fancied that he liked her, and she relentlessly mocked him for it and probably scarred him for life. So I think I got the last laugh.
Well, it wasn't so much that I found it out, it's that I had it told to me by, it was either my older brother or my dad. I think my dad would have been watching Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior and made some sort of joke about how if a guy was beating up a man that looked that old, he would have to go to prison. Or if it was my brother suggesting that Jake the Snake Roberts' snake wasn't even real. What did either of them know? Point is, they both told me it wasn't real and I didn't care. And that was the great misconception of everybody who has ever watched wrestling and has ever then been asked that question. Oh, you know it's fake, right? It's never once mattered that it was never real. The Ultimate Warrior was my first favourite wrestler, and thank God when I was just a 5-year-old boy I didn't know what the real life guy was like, because the last thing I would have wanted to know about the Ultimate Warrior when I was that age was his real life views, his real life attitudes. I just wanted to know he could wear really bright colourful trunks, amazing face paint, and batter Hulk Hogan, or at least make it look that way. I remember even going to school and as kids, all of us talking about how they would just pretend to do it on the telly, which didn't stop us doing it for real, and that was always made it more fun. But yes, I remember specifically my dad and my older brother relishing in telling me that wrestling wasn't real, and instead directing me to watch football and support Sunderland just like they did. One was a really great and endlessly gratifying choice, Money in the Bank 2020 aside, and one was the worst decision I ever made of all time in terms of things that I try to enjoy. So if choosing between sport and sports entertainment, go with the latter every single time.
Nobody actually really believes wrestling's completely real. Like, I mean, when you're a kid, you like Captain America and you like Iron Man, you buy into it and you sort of think it's kind of real, but you don't ever really think it's really real, do you? Even as a kid? I don't know, maybe just me. Anyway, the time I found out it definitely wasn't real was at school, a place where I learned many things. I presume our teachers had noticed that we started to like wrestling, we started talking about wrestling, we started play fighting wrestling, we started having wrestling t-shirts under our school uniform, we started having wrestling things written on our badge, we had wrestling stickers on our exercise books, and they were like, oh God, we're gonna have to talk about this. Anyway, we had an assembly in 7, I want to say, don't know what grade that is. I was like 11 or 12 or something like that. And one of our teachers, God rest his soul, Mr. Douglas, was like, "For wrestling? You like the wrestling, do you? It's a lot of bloody rubbish, that wrestling. When they're hitting each other, like that's not how you really punch a man. Load of bloody rubbish, that wrestling. You mark my words, son. One day, you're going to be in a real fight and you're going to see how people punch and you'll know that wrestling. So load of bloody rubbish." And we left that being like, well, what does he know? Old man doesn't know what wrestling is, etc. Like it's actually fake. Anyway, that very afternoon, literally that afternoon, there was a fight in the school and one punch was thrown, and in that punch, the guy got the other guy's teeth embedded in his hand. pulled them both out with his thing, and it was one of the most gross things I've ever seen in my life. And on the bus back home that night, you know, in a film where they've got the little voices in their head and they're having the flashbacks, it was like, bloody rubbish, not real, wait till you see a real punch, ah, my hand. And then I was just like, oh my God, the punches aren't real. What else could be fake? And then kind of that did sort of ruin it for me. But anyway, in a couple of weeks after that, I got into a fight myself on the school field, DDT'd somebody, split their head open a little bit, and while I was getting told off by Mr. Douglas, I said, what's the problem? I thought it wasn't real. So there you go. There's my story. Still real to me, etc.
I was an idiot as a child. An idiot living in a fantasy world created by Vince McMahon, and I had to be told that professional wrestling was fake because after a football game gone awry, the hard kid from further down the street, Snodger, he just told me, following an argument, that pro wrestling, the WWF, was fake, and I was a little idiot for enjoying it. I was incensed, you see, because inspired by Hulk Hogan and Marty Jannetty, and imagine, by the way, not being cynical when it turns out what happens to your heroes, inspired by Hogan and Jannetty, my favourites, I ran up to him. And then as I got closer to his face, I realised, how am I going to leg drop a guy who's standing up and won't just fall down? What, am I going to climb up a tree and jump off? That's a ridiculous thing to do. And it all slowly dawned on me, hang on, this kid's right. My world is broken. And by the way, Hulk Hogan, where the hell were you? Where were you there to inspire me? Because it didn't bloody work. I've been saying my prayers, and then when the time came for those prayers to be answered, I couldn't leg drop him. He was standing up. So, yeah, I had to be told. I had to be told that pro wrestling, the WWF, with its anthropomorphic turkey men, balloon-muscled, face-painted idiots. He was another hero of mine, Ultimate Warrior. You let me down as well by being a cunt. I should have listened to Snodger. Should have got into boxing because it just warped my whole worldview, this professional wrestling lark. There are no heroes. Nothing is real. The hard kid, the lump down the street, was actually right when you were told for years that how these people will get their comeuppance. I got my comeuppance because I couldn't do a leg drop on him.
When did I realise that wrestling was fake? No one necessarily told me. I think I figured this out on my own at a late age, so it's not quite, I figured it out myself. It's still quite embarrassing because I figured it out quite late in the day. I didn't have a lot of friends to compare notes with when it came to wrestling because not a lot of people were watching it in the same way that I watched it. We watched it a little bit, but I was quite heavily invested in the world and everything else. But I figured it out around WrestleMania 24 when the Big Show took on Floyd Mayweather because, yeah, that was a mismatch. A big old mismatch. I suspended the disbelief when Mysterio went up against Lesnar and went up against Big Show, people like that, and you had the small guy going up against the big guy because they were wrestlers and anything can happen and he's super fast and the rest of it. But when Floyd Mayweather, who's a boxer, obviously one of the best boxers of all time, but he's this tiny boxer, went up against Big Show and then he managed to win. Yeah, I think that was the last straw for me. I was a bit like, that doesn't seem right. Okay. So then I think I'd started, the internet wasn't as big as what it is now in terms of having so much quick access to everything, but I started doing a little bit of research behind the scenes, looking what booking was, and my heart just broke a little bit. It was a quiet realization, but it didn't deter me. I stuck in there because I love the story aspect, I love everything else about pro wrestling, the athletics and all the rest of it. But yeah, that was a bittersweet moment at WrestleMania 24 because obviously we had some great matches. You had an Undertaker and Edge and Cena, Triple H, Orton, Ric Flair, Shawn Michaels, always great matches. But that was the one for me where I was like, okay, something strange is afoot.